Philosophers talk to our times, we citizens of dystopias. It was always one of the questions I'd ask undergraduates. So, did you actually want to live in utopia? And about 50% probably said yes. And the rest? Well, they were put off in the same reason I was put off by utopia, that more means you to be put off. When he wrote the book in whenever it was, 15-something. The utopians certainly do toleration. They tolerate religions. They tolerate people being mad. They tolerate all sorts of things that in more society were not tolerated. But the minute you started to question any of their rules or step beyond the limits of their toleration, for the minutes of their collective identity, and wonder why and when things came from, you were in trouble in utopia. They might just call you mad and tolerate you if you were lucky, or they might exile you, or they might execute you. Utopia came with a hard edge, you see. It tolerated what it tolerated, and as it always saw other cultures as somehow lesser than it, any attempt to look to other worlds beyond it, they would do it in their own way, so they would learn from other people. But I mean, customs that they didn't like, they would simply declare were less than them and eradicate. It was toleration, therefore, up to a point. I'm not knocking utopia, by the way. I'm always about 50-50 about whether I would have liked it there. I think I'm far too much of a nonconformist for it to have worked. So I think I would have been shown the door fairly early on. But that's a different matter. But it's worth thinking about utopia when you are thinking about dystopias and how you actually define them and what makes them different from just failed utopias. Are they simply utopias gone wrong, as 1984 would portray a dystopia, or are they something different? You can see it in my use of singular and plural. For me, a utopia, by definition, is singular. Its very identity lies in its assertion of its singular existence. It is utopia. No place, perhaps, which is what it means, but always singular. And it forever asserts its singularity. And in that, its tolerance breaks down, because there is only one utopia. Dystopias are, of course, totally different. For me, a dystopia, dystopias, because they always come in plural, are what you get when you're on the road to the Hobbesian state of nature, but you don't quite get there. Let me explain. I've talked about this before and more than once. The Hobbes in Leviathan puts forward one of those really convincing ideas about what is a state. And what makes a state is not logic and reason. It's not fear of a powerful ruler. Hobbes is clear. If you fear your powerful ruler, then you're already in a state of nature. You're already in what I would call a dystopia. No, what the ruler does is they use fear effectively. Not open-endedly, but they use it to naturalize a certain set of rules, a certain set of assumptions. Once those rules and assumptions are accepted by everybody, and the ruler must arrange spectacular ways to enforce those deep social facts, I guess we would call them. Be they grisly executions for those that break it, or just ritual, religion. Those assumptions must, Durkheim-like, be bound into the fate and the minds of humans. And once that's done, then actually a ruler needs to do very little else, because they will already have defined their position as the ruler. And human reason and the golden principle that do unto others as you should have done to yourself will simply take over. Humans can order their own society, but they can't order their own assumptions that make that society. Oh, we can all make up our own little perfect utopias for us alone, perhaps. But it is a ruler who binds them all together, makes them into a single state that doesn't contaminate, pull apart. So you get dystopias the absolute minute that the assumptions, the glue that binds that state together, I mean the initial moves, the initial assumptions, are questioned. That happened is clear. Anytime you question a election result, or for that matter, hold an illegal referendum where you lie about what the outcome means, anytime you do any of that, anytime you fundamentally cheat in a general election, then you are likely to be heading towards dystopia. And once you are there, it is very hard for you to actually get back to anything normal. Hobbes would say it was impossible. He would think that you probably had to go all the way down to the state of nature. But it seems to be to me that isn't quite what happens. What you get is a state that dissolves into some kind of gangsterism and quasi-legitimacy. So currently, we have all sorts of bodies that appear to be carrying on just as before, but nobody really accepts any of the assumptions that drives them, and nobody really accepts their law as something simple and obvious. So confidence in international law begins to slip. Confidence in local justice begins to slip, particularly in countries where the judicial system has become just an adjunct of the executive. So I mean America, let's just be obvious. But even in Britain, people start to question judges and go, where did they come from? Why did they make that judgment? Judgments become then terribly political because they couldn't do anything else. Laws become necessarily suspect. There becomes no way of trusting your government. It wouldn't matter whether you were ruled by Charlemagne himself, except Charlemagne knew how to use power and fear. If you were in a dystopia, then you will simply question the rules that you are given, while kind of half accepting them. What makes it truly a dystopia is it is a world of half-truths, half-realities, where you almost accept the rules that once bound you. You know that they did exist, but you just don't kind of believe that the assumptions are still there. And so what you then have is a very inchoate state that's constantly shifting, constantly changing, where you're never really quite sure what the rules are anymore, because the government is changing the rules and you're changing your rules. And one of the interesting things about our modern dystopias is that they appear to be relatively stable. I mean, in Hobbes' day, in the 17th century, if you were at this point, this is when you collapsed into civil war, straight away. I mean, there was no... It took the happiest king in Christendom 2 years to go from being the happiest king in Christendom in 40 to the English Civil War in 1642. Charles I was the happiest king in Christendom. So not very long, 2 years it took him. And then it took another 20 years to get back to where they'd begun, for everything to reset to where it had been before the Civil War, fundamentally. That kind of time frame. But in our more complicated societies, where there are more institutions and probably more at stake, it clearly doesn't work like that. A dystopia is, of course, the headless chicken of political organisation. It is the organisation after the death of the god of the state, what it carries on looking like. Part of it gets caught up by gangster organisations. We all assume that there is always somebody out there manipulating now how we believe. We all remember an older system. We all dream of something that once was, which is, of course, one of the reasons dystopias fuel the far right. They like to create them because it makes them powerful, because people are naturally nostalgic for a world they now no longer trust, and perhaps would no longer like. The world where order was based on assumptions that actually worked. But all these moves then against each other. All these elements move against each other. And you're caught up wondering what will happen. Will the entire edifice eventually collapse, as it did in the 17th century? As it has always done at this point. Although, I have to, thinking about it, there's another classic example of something that took, a good 70 years to die. I mean the Roman Empire. After the death of Theodosius, probably the Roman Empire became ungovernable. There were one or two good emperors like Marinus after the death of Theodosius. But by and large, the empire became too unwieldy, the barbarians too fierce, its population too low, its religion inappropriate for war. It became unable to exist, and yet it survived 80 years before it finally collapsed. And that's kind of what I think we're playing out. We've slipped into that dystopic moment in civilization. The society's already dead, the glue has come off. The question is, can it prop itself up on its parts? And if it does, what then happens? Do they descend as ancient Rome descended into robber barons who took over various bits of the country, who enforced some elements of justice and not others? Or does it all fall down? Dystopia is that moment then, that hanging moment after the death of the state, when you're trying to think, what happens now? Is it going to tumble down? Or is it going to just stay like a horrific shadow, a demon, up there, catching us all up as part of it still, demanding we all conform to certain bits of the state as it gets us in the power, long after we've given up faith? That is the problem of dystopia. Of course, if you tug it down, then you go down into the state of war, and God knows what happens. Perhaps we can bolt it back together again, and the wretched thing will move. Perhaps indeed, but I doubt it. That's never really worked, because the bolts never work. You have to re-found a faith. Perhaps we can find a different belief while we're still within it, still knowing that we are in dystopia, and finding a different way to root our assumptions in truth, in the horror of environmental collapse, whatever. We might be able to erupt from inside the state and reform it. All these possibilities are plausibly, logically possible, but that's not what has ever happened. What has happened normally, what happened in the case of ancient Rome was it took 76 years for the large, complicated state to fall down. What happened in 17th century Europe is that it took 2 years. For us, who knows how long it takes? All we know is that we're caught up in that twisting mirage of dystopias, which follows when you've lost faith in the state in which you once were, when the assumptions have died, and only the raw power, the gangster, remain in charge.